room is rarely the most dangerous. When an undefeated MMA fighter decided to boost his ego by bullying a quiet, gray-haired trucker at a Texas diner, he expected a quick submission. He had no idea he just cornered a former Navy SEAL team commander. The rain was coming down in sheets across Interstate 20, turning the neon sign of O'Malley's Diner into a blurry, bleeding smear of red and blue against the West Texas night. Inside, the diner smelled of stale coffee, diesel fumes, and burnt hash browns. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour that usually belonged exclusively to long-haul truckers, insomniacs, and the weary shift workers of the oil fields. Sitting in a corner booth, facing the door out of a decades-old habit he couldn't break, was Dominic Hayes. At 52, Dominic looked like a man who had worked hard all his life. He wore a faded flannel shirt over a thermal Henley, denim jeans, and scuffed work boots. His hair was salt and pepper, kept relatively short, and his face was lined with the deep crevices of a man who had spent too much time squinting into the sun. On the table next to his half-empty mug of black coffee rested a worn paperback thriller and a set of keys to a Peterbilt 389 parked idling in the massive lot outside. To anyone walking in, Dominic was just another invisible gear in the massive machine of American logistics. But Dominic wasn't just a truck driver. Underneath the flannel, his shoulders held the dense, coiled musculature of a man who had spent 2 decades carrying impossible weights through the worst environments on Earth. Before he bought his big rig to enjoy the quiet solitude of the open highway, Dominic Hayes was Commander Hayes, leading one of the most elite direct action units within the United States Navy SEALs. He had seen combat in Fallujah, the Korengal Valley, and a dozen other nameless places. He had retired quietly, trading the deafening roar of Black Hawk helicopters for the steady rumble of a diesel engine. He just wanted to be left alone. The bell above the diner door jingled violently, shattering the quiet hum of the restaurant. In walked Damian Cole. Damian was 28 years old, stood 6'2", and possessed the intimidating, heavily tattooed physique of an athlete in his prime. He was a local celebrity in Odessa, an undefeated professional mixed martial artist with a 15-0 record, heavily marketed by his management, and a newly minted black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Damian owned Ironclad Striking and Grappling, the premier MMA gym in the county. He was arrogant, loud, and constantly surrounded by a sycophantic entourage that fed his towering ego. Tonight, Damian was flanked by 2 of his heavy-hitting training partners, Leon and Brad. They strolled into the diner like they owned the lease, laughing raucously, their voices echoing off the linoleum floors. They had just finished a brutal sparring session and were riding the adrenaline high, looking for food and, subconsciously, an audience. I told him, man!" Damian barked, slapping the counter hard enough to make the salt shakers jump. "I told him if he shoots for that single leg again, I'm snapping his neck. Guy has 0 head movement." Sarah, the 60-year-old waitress who had been working at O'Malley's since the Reagan administration, approached them with a tired sigh. "What can I get you boys?" Damian didn't even look at her. 3 steaks, rare, eggs, and whatever protein shakes you got in the back. He tossed his heavy, sweat-soaked gym bag carelessly onto the counter. The bag slid across the slick formica, catching the edge of Dominic's coffee mug on the adjacent corner of the booth. The heavy porcelain tipped, sending a wave of scalding dark roast cascading directly over Dominic's paperback and pooling against his forearm. The diner fell dead silent. The only sound was the hissing of the grill in the back. Dominic didn't jump. He didn't curse. He slowly pulled his arm back, picked up his soaked paperback, and shook the liquid off the pages. He grabbed a handful of paper napkins from the dispenser and began to methodically dab at the table. Leon nudged Damian, pointing at the spill and snickering. Damian finally looked over. Instead of apologizing, a smug grin spread across his face. He thrived on intimidation. It was his currency. He loved watching regular civilians shrink in his presence. "Oops, my bad, old man. Next time, don't sit so close to the splash zone." Dominic didn't look up from his wiping. "It's fine. Just watch where you throw your gear." His voice was low, gravelly, and entirely devoid of emotion. The lack of fear in Dominic's voice triggered something ugly in Damien. In the cage and in this town, people deferred to him. They recognized the cauliflower ear, the broad shoulders, the aura of violence. This gray-haired nobody in a flannel shirt wasn't giving him the respect his ego demanded. Damien took a step toward Dominic's booth, leaning his heavy frame over the table, invading Dominic's personal space. "Excuse me? Did you just tell me to watch what I'm doing?" Sarah stepped in nervously. "Damien, please, he didn't mean anything. Let me just get your food." "Shut up, Sarah," Damien snapped, not breaking his stare from Dominic. "I'm talking to the trucker. You got a problem, buddy? You want me to buy you a new little book?" Dominic finished wiping the table. He neatly folded the soaked napkins, placed them on his plate, and finally raised his eyes. They were a pale, icy blue. When Damien looked into them, he expected to see anxiety, avoidance, or anger. Instead, he saw absolutely nothing. It was the detached, analytical stare of a man calculating the exact distance between a throat and a thumb. "I don't have a problem," Dominic said calmly. "I'm going to pay my bill, and I'm going to leave. I suggest you go back to your friends and eat your steak." Dominic slid out of the booth, dropping a $20 bill on the table, more than enough to cover the coffee and leave a heavy tip for Sarah. He picked up his ruined book, adjusted his trucker cap, and began to walk toward the door. "Hey, I didn't say you were dismissed!" Damien shouted, his face flushing red. Dominic didn't even break his stride. He pushed open the glass door and stepped out into the pouring rain, leaving Damien standing in the diner looking like a fool in front of his crew. "Let it go, D," Brad muttered. "He's just an old trucker." "No," Damien growled, his pride stung beyond repair. "Nobody turns their back on me. Nobody." He shoved past Sarah, throwing the diner door open, and marched out into the storm. The parking lot of O'Malley's was a massive expanse of cracked asphalt, deeply rutted by the weight of 18-wheelers. The rain was torrential now, turning the potholes into deep, muddy puddles. The yellow glow of the sodium streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the rows of parked freight trucks. Dominic was halfway to his Peterbilt, his boots splashing rhythmically in the puddles, his mind already shifting to the route ahead. He had a load of steel pipes to deliver to Lubbock by morning. He wasn't thinking about the arrogant kid in the diner. To Dominic, Damien was a non-factor, a minor environmental hazard like a blown tire or a patch of black ice. "Hey, Flannel!" Dominic stopped. He let out a slow, controlled breath, the kind he used to exhale right before pulling the trigger of a MK-11 sniper rifle. He didn't want to do this. He was a man of peace now. He had spent his youth swimming in violence, and he had no desire to drown in it again over a spilled cup of coffee. He turned around slowly. Damien was marching through the rain, his broad shoulders hunched aggressively, fists clenched. Leon and Brad had followed him out and were standing under the diner's awning, watching with grim anticipation. "You think you can just walk away when I'm talking to you?" Damien snarled, closing the distance until he was less than 3 feet from Dominic. The rain plastered Damien's tight shirt to his muscular chest. "Son," Dominic said, his voice cutting clearly through the sound of the storm, "you are looking for a fight to prove something to yourself. I am not the man you want to test that on. Turn around, go inside, enjoy your youth." It was a sincere warning, but to Damien's ears it sounded like patronizing disrespect. "I'm going to put you to sleep, old man," Damien sneered. Damien moved with the lightning speed of a professional athlete. He threw a devastating left hook, a punch that had knocked out 3 men in his last 5 fights. It was technically perfect, loaded with torque from his hips, aimed squarely at Dominic's jaw. But Dominic wasn't there. To an MMA fighter, a fight is a sport with rules, a referee, a mat, and a bell. To a Tier 1 operator, a physical altercation is a life-or-death crisis to be neutralized in milliseconds using the path of least resistance. As Damien's shoulder twitched, Dominic's military OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, processed the threat faster than conscious thought. Before Damien's fist crossed the halfway point, Dominic stepped inside the punch, completely bypassing the strike zone. Dominic's left hand shot up, not to block, but to parry the bicep, redirecting Damien's momentum forward. Simultaneously, Dominic dropped his weight and brought his right boot sharply into the side of Damien's lead knee. Not a hard, bone-breaking kick, but a perfectly timed structural disruption. Deprived of his base and fighting his own forward momentum, Damien lost his footing on the slick, oil-stained asphalt. He went down hard, face first into a puddle of muddy rainwater, scraping his chin on the gravel. Under the awning, Leon and Brad gasped. The undefeated champion had just been dumped on his face by a guy who looked like a hardware store manager. Damien scrambled to his feet, spitting mud, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and uncontrollable rage. "You lucky old bastard!" he screamed. Abandoning his striking, Damien reverted to his bread and butter, his grappling. He lunged forward for a double-leg takedown, intending to drive Dominic into the concrete, mount him, and rain down elbows. Dominic saw the level change instantly. He didn't try to sprawl like a wrestler. Instead, as Damien lunged, Dominic pivoted sharply on his heel, stepping off the center line like a matador. As Damien flew past, grabbing empty air, Dominic brought his right forearm crashing down onto the back of Damien's neck with the weight of a falling anvil. Damien collapsed onto the asphalt again, the breath violently knocked out of his lungs. Before Damien could react, Dominic dropped his knee directly into the center of Damien's spine, pinning him to the ground. In a fraction of a second, Dominic seized Damien's right wrist, twisted it violently behind his back, and applied a joint lock that immediately stressed the shoulder to the very edge of dislocation. Damien let out a choked gasp of excruciating pain. The rain beat down on his back. He couldn't move an inch. The pressure on his shoulder was agonizing, precise, and completely inescapable. Dominic leaned down, his face inches from Damien's ear. The trucker wasn't breathing heavily. His heart rate hadn't even spiked. "Listen to me very carefully," Dominic whispered, his voice as cold as the rain. "In the ring, the referee stops the fight when you tap. Out here, there is no referee. If you try to stand up before I reach my truck, I will shatter your rotator cuff and you will never throw another punch for the rest of your life. Do you understand?" Damien, trembling from the pain and the terrifying realization of his own utter helplessness, squeezed his eyes shut and nodded. Yeah, I understand." Dominic held the lock for 2 more seconds, ensuring the psychological dominance was complete, then smoothly released the wrist and stood up. He didn't look back at Leon or Brad. He walked to his Peterbilt, climbed into the cab, fired up the massive engine, and pulled out onto Interstate 20, the roar of his exhaust drowning out the storm. Damien lay in the mud for a long time, clutching his shoulder, staring at the red taillights disappearing into the dark. He had just been physically and psychologically dismantled in less than 10 seconds. The undefeated black belt had finally met a master, and it broke his mind. For Damien Cole, the humiliation in the diner parking lot was a cancer that began to eat him alive from the inside out. The next 3 days were a living nightmare. His shoulder throbbed, a constant physical reminder of his inadequacy. But the mental anguish was far worse. Leon and Brad hadn't told anyone at the gym what had happened. Damien had threatened to ruin their lives if they breathed a word of it. But Damien could feel the shift in their eyes. The reverence was gone, replaced by a lingering, uncomfortable doubt. Damien couldn't train. Every time he hit the heavy bag, he saw the icy, empty blue eyes of the truck driver. He saw the way the older man had moved. No wasted energy, no telegraphing, just brutal geometric efficiency. It wasn't MMA. It was something entirely different, something Damien didn't understand, and that terrified him. To reclaim his sanity and his alpha status, Damien convinced himself it was a fluke. The rain, the slick asphalt, a lucky trip. He needed to prove it. He needed to find the trucker, corner him, and beat him into the dirt where there were no slippery puddles and no chance for a lucky escape. Damien's older brother, Greg, worked as a dispatcher for a regional freight logistics company based out of Midland. It took Damien exactly 24 hours of leaning on his brother and calling in favors to run the plates of the Peterbilt, which Leon had managed to memorize, and track down the driver's manifest. "His name is Dominic Hayes," Greg told Damien over the phone, sounding uneasy. "He's an independent owner-operator. He's got a drop-off scheduled at a steel yard in Lubbock late Thursday night." Why do you need this, D? Don't worry about it, Damien hung up. By midnight on Thursday, Damien, Leon, and Brad were sitting in Damien's lifted black Ford Raptor, parked with its lights off in the shadows of the deserted industrial sector of Lubbock. The steel yard was a massive fenced-in compound surrounded by abandoned warehouses and empty lots. There were no streetlights here, no cameras, no witnesses. I don't know about this, man, Brad said from the back seat, staring nervously at the imposing gates of the steel yard. That guy? There was something wrong with him. He didn't fight like a civilian. He's a nobody, Damien snapped, his knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. He got lucky. Tonight we show him what happens when he steps into my world. He doesn't leave this lot walking. At 1:15 a.m., the deep guttural rumble of a diesel engine broke the silence. The bright LED headlights of Dominic's Peterbilt swept across the cracked pavement as the massive rig made a wide turn toward the steel